the more clarity you have, it means the less questions you can ask because almost everything is clear. At the same time means that you've already made up your mind about so many things, right? And if you backtrack it, sometimes when you're in ambiguity, it's a good thing. Because when you're in ambiguity, you have the opportunity to see things you've never seen before.
On this episode of The Creator Community, we'll meet Carlo Mahfouz, a Lebanese-born entrepreneur in the healthcare edtech space with a passion for creation, guitar playing, and opera singing. We'll learn how Carlo improved his business relationships by getting outside of his comfort zone and taking opera lessons. We'll then follow Carlo's journey that started with him learning of an explosion in his home country to publishing his new book, Reality Check, in pursuit of the right questions. Check out the show. Welcome to The Creator Community. This is a podcast from book publisher New Degree Press. I'm your host, John Saunders. The show is designed to celebrate, elevate, and showcase many of the incredible authors that have published their books with NDP. This year, NDP will cross over 1,300 published authors on 6 continents and have earned the 293rd spot on the Inc. 5000 list. This is the fastest growing privately held companies in America. This episode is a kickoff to season 4, and today I have with me Carlo Mahfouz. Carlo Mahfouz is a Renaissance man, an entrepreneur and product development executive in the healthcare and edtech space with a deep understanding of technology. He works developing products to help improve patient outcomes and driving change in organizations, teams, and individuals. Always curious, Carlo is a firm believer in tech's power to create positive global change. He's a Nava opera singer who heads innovation at a classical music nonprofit company and now a published author. Carlo grew up in Lebanon. He holds a bachelor's degree from Notre Dame University and an MBA from Georgetown University. In his free time, he enjoys hiking, drawing, photography, and playing classical guitar. Carlo, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, John. It's great to be here.
It is awesome to have you. Before we get into this amazing book that you have coming out here, I'd love to share with our listeners a little bit more about your career journey and what led you to this point here.
Absolutely. So as you said, my journey started in Lebanon. So I was born and raised there. So when I studied computer science with emphasis on computer graphics and animation, actually, back in the day, I started with designing games, doing some motion graphics and animation around the time. And then slowly started transitioning more and more into programming and fell in love with technology in general. I love this fast-paced kind of environment where things are constantly changing, and there is some significant appeal for me in that. And then, of course, I moved to the States, still in development, more on SaaS solutions. And I led this company where we work on simulation. So we're in the healthcare education sector where we're mostly focusing on training. And I've been in actually that industry for the past decade or so in different functional and technical roles. And most recently, graduated from the executive MBA at Georgetown, which was Go Hoya Saksa. For the most part, it's been a great journey so thus far, and working now at Laerdal Medical, which acquired us 2 years back as their director of digital platforms, focusing a lot of the digital transformation initiatives we're doing.
A lot of focus on technology, a lot of focus on learning, continuing to educate yourself. What was the driving force to move to the US?
The need for learning and growth was a little bit driven by career, but at the same time finding I'm not necessarily getting engaged as much in Lebanon. The technology scene in Lebanon was kind of coming up, but not necessarily as quickly. I barely graduated and I already leading a team building a 2D massive MMO game at the time in Lebanon. And I felt like, looking for more at that stage of my life early. So I moved to the States and kind of joined a really amazing team here in DC. It was just challenging me in ways that was not present for me before. And that was super exciting. Kind of been doing that since.
Not afraid to challenge yourself and focus on continued growth. I really appreciate that, which might have led you to getting a book off the ground. Carlo, what was that journey like for you?
It's all kind of based on this challenge at the end of the day of, constantly challenging yourself. But I have this passion as well of creation. I didn't talk too much about my more artistic ventures, which I started late in life and now as well, heading innovation at Lyrica Classic. But it kind of all drove to this moment in 2020 where I was like looking for something to create. I was trying to, I don't know, I felt probably stuck with the COVID and everything else. And coincidentally, I saw your journey through probably Georgetown and your book journey. At the end of the day, I was like, okay, might be something interesting I want to like look into. I've never thought really about writing a book, even though I've tried different things from singing, playing guitar, you name it, and all relatively in like late in my life, not necessarily earlier on. So I was like, why not? I think this would be something exciting, and it most definitely delivered.
That's awesome. So thank you, social media, right? And following a bit, finding a bit about the journey there. That's amazing. So the book is Reality Check: In Pursuit of the Right Questions, coming out spring 2022, late spring. Now, Carlo, what is a reality check? What's it about?
Yeah, so reality check, this feeling when you get like, I think in COVID it happened to almost everyone where, we were stuck, things were changing very quickly, and suddenly your priorities kind of get reoriented, whether you like it or not. And you have these moments where there is a lot of stimuli, but at the same time, so much clarity. And that's what happened to me. And that's where reality check came from. It was like, okay, this moment where intense clarity, but not necessarily less things happening or not necessarily like less change. It was in the middle of all of it. And I kind of started getting me down this road of questioning things. Is like, why now we're paying attention, for example, to healthcare? What happened there? Like, nothing is new as far as problems we've had. Education, similar things, kids being at home. Technology has always been present. The problems are always there, but somehow with COVID, the priorities changed. And I kind of was looking, I don't know, to understand that better.
What was the first thing that helped you? Was there a moment you could take us to that moment, or could you take us to that moment where this entered your radar screen? There was all of these things happening. Life seemed to be accelerating. Technology suddenly became even more front and center, or maybe entirely front and center for our lives. Was there a reality check moment for you that really helped crystallize this thought for you?
Yes, actually. So, 2020 had its kind of problems, but for me and kind of being from Lebanon, there was an added layer, which happened a little bit in August, actually. There was this massive explosion, which happened at the border in Beirut. It came to almost like a nuclear bomb, and it's wet. My family still lives there, even though I've been living here for a long time. So, at that moment, the first thing which comes to your mind, you drop everything and you're like, is everyone okay? Is like your attention suddenly, changes, what your priorities are changes. And for me, that moment was that day. And suddenly like the reality check kind of was so present, like, and so strong, where I was just like seeking, making sure my family is okay. Thankfully, no one was close to it, but a lot of people were impacted. Kind of that kicked it this even more, like it gave it the kind of a boost. Like, okay, it was not necessarily something positive which happened, but nonetheless kind of intensified this need to understand and be able to gauge this kind of what's attention, grabbing our attention.
And so this sounds like about prioritization to me. Is this what I'm hearing? Because we live in this world where we're constantly getting pulled in all these different directions. And the reality check I'm hearing was, particularly with, gosh, is my family safe? All of these things around me maybe aren't as important as I thought they were. Is that what I'm hearing?
Pretty much. It's like how we tackle what matters most, to be honest. It's like how, amidst everything we're going through, how we can see these things, right? And what would be an approach for us to ask the right questions to get there, but, just change the way we see the problems we're facing and to be able to prioritize them at the end of the day and like kind of look at them from a different lens, or actually see them in the beginning. Like, sometimes they're just completely off radar. Absolutely.
It's an interesting point you're making there, because right, how do you recognize or create these reality check moments? And again, we live in this world where we're jumping from device to device, thing to thing, and our minds are crowded all day long. So how do you find this clarity?
Yeah, so, I'm an engineer by trade, so I learned a little bit on my engineering and I kind of tried to reverse engineer it for the most part. And what I ended up with is three main kind of pillars, which kind of reality check moment, if you want, sort of speak, builds on. One, which is context. Kind of context sets the stage of the environment that you live in from all of its dimension, whether it's internal or external. All of these things funnel there. Second, time. And this is an interesting notion because there is this notion of past and present and this now moment and what's happening in the now moment, which bring you really to the current context and like getting a very clear read on the current context. And the last was like just the observer, like us who are experiencing this reality check moment, like what is impacting that moment specifically from our observation as us and observers. So kind of these three pillars I shape up the book on, and try to elaborate on each one of them to describe really in entirety what a reality check moment is, how we recognize it, how we can create it if we need to some extent, and just have that kind of check, if you want, more often rather than not.
Can you take us through another case study through this three-pillar example you just set up and maybe somebody interviewed for the book?
Yeah, absolutely. So, probably one of the key stories, especially in the time chapter, when we're looking at the now and kind of understanding, the present moment, I call it moment of truth. It is, the sudden yanking you off. Probably happened for me when the explosion happened in particular, where you just kind of your attention grabbed and suddenly things become clear. And at that moment for me, the safety of my family was like the only thing left, like everything went away. And one of the stories, I got the chance to interview Ola Helen. Ola is someone I met in Norway. He's a design manager and writer and creator for the most part. And he shared with me a story about his dad. His dad had Alzheimer's at some point in, around his 65th birthday, actually, to be exact. And what was fascinating in his story is that how he shared that his experience of what happened was not necessarily a bad experience in retrospect to his mom. And the details goes that, he was one time watching his dad watching a game, like a sports game. And then he realized that, his dad is no longer catching on to what's happening. And it was his favorite thing to do. And suddenly he realized, oh, like my dad is really sick. Like there's something wrong. Like he's changing. And in that moment, in that instant, he looked at it in a different way. It's like, I want to capitalize on my time with him. I want to, make the most out of it. And as a consequence, he ended up creating this, worldwide kind of video of people from around the world saying happy birthday to his dad. And it was a very intense, emotional moment and kind of a change which happened. But I think at the end, what was the key takeaway is, for him, the bad thing still happened. Like, it's still very something difficult to go through, but it was not necessarily as bad as an experience as he says his mom had. And mostly because, she was having difficulty to let go. She was having difficulty to accept that change that is happening. And sometimes our most difficult, aspect of reading the now is accepting the change which is happening, and embracing it to some extent to navigate it differently.
So two people living through an identical experience with the same person as the center point had markedly different circumstances. So that's interesting. And I think in the book, you talk about communication and external challenges and how we sort of set or don't set expectations. How do these things affect our outcomes from how we go through life and have reality checks?
Yeah, if we move on to the observer specifically, because I consider like anyone who's experienced the observer, there is one dimension which I talk about, especially in communication, which I think is so critical to us because it's our medium of connecting with everyone around us. You ask a question, you make a statement, you express a feeling, it all goes through communication. And I talk about this thing which is called speak the same language in particular. And the reason it becomes very important is not speaking the same language in the context of, I'm speaking English and you're speaking English, but actually speaking with the terminology that we both understand. And I think there, one of the key elements and takeaways, I end up interviewing Jenna Lynn, who was basically a sign language interpreter. And she had something which was really key, which she said almost as that I don't assume, right? I don't make any assumptions. I just ask. It's as simple as that. And it was fascinating for me because typically when we're speaking, we make assumptions that, certain words, everyone is universally understands. Simple things as yes, no, okay, like any kind of confirmation, or just asking about like your identity in different ways, who you are, where you're coming from, your accent. We make tons of assumptions. I think our mind is optimized to do these assumptions. Otherwise, we would be overwhelmed, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but recognizing that these are happening kind of gives us this different way at looking where the bottlenecks are. Like at the end of the day, the language we use is our liberator, and at the same time our constrictor in a way. If you think about it, it's the limitations in it which are allow us to have miscommunication, allow us not to basically be able to engage in the problem, understand the problem, all of these things. At the same time, it's the same gateway to do all of these things. It's like a double-edged sword in a way. So the aspect around it is like really paying attention to what we communicate, not making assumptions, being able, it's very easy to solve this problem by just asking a question. The answer easily solves it, and you can move to the next step.
Fascinating that you got this lesson from a sign language instructor teacher. That's really interesting, because talk about different language and communication style, right? So many times, particularly in work, and we're busy and trying to get all these things done and meet deadlines and all of these things. And oftentimes there's this miscommunication because we just don't know what the other person is hearing or listening to. But there's also ambiguity and extremes in these circumstances that can come about. Carlo, in those moments, how do we find reality checks in these crazy moments? What's the roadmap? What's the playbook to get that done? Because it's so easy to get distracted and feel like we can't take the time to think about it. What's your suggestion there?
Yeah, great question, John, there. I think, ambiguity is a key aspect, which I think more and more of us are engaging with in a day, especially leadership and, a landscape which is continuously changing day to day. Technology definitely pushing the limits on how fast we're adapting and changing at the same time. And it becomes a really valuable tool for us to measure really the clarity which we have or not have, actually, when we're engaging with problems. And I think ambiguity can be used as a lever, actually, by itself. I'll give you an example is, you go into a problem and the problem domain for you is probably like super clear, like, all of the answers, everything. And I think that's a problem sometimes. Like it's on the, I'm trying to think about it in an inverse way, right? The more clarity you have, it means the less questions you can ask, because almost everything is clear. At the same time means that you've already made up your mind about so many things, like, right? And if you backtrack it, sometimes when you're in ambiguity, it's a good thing. Because when you're in ambiguity, you have the opportunity to see things you've never seen before, like, right? And I think we miss that because we think sometimes, and I think technology has, made it worse, is that we think we have all the answers and Google can give you an answer within seconds, right? But actually we don't. And the fact to accept that there is an opportunity, an answer which we don't know exists, and to find it, I think is so much valuable. And it kind of by itself allows for, this clarity and reality check happening, in the context. It allows that to surface. There's just the opportunity. Allowing for that opportunity to exist is super valuable.
That's interesting. So having to recognize that there is ambiguity in the world or in a problem, or maybe we don't have all the answers, what would you say to someone, Carlo, who's never even considered that? They have all the ideas. They're type A personality. They're running ahead to get this done, that done, run a project, lead a circumstance. What would you tell that person who maybe hasn't had that moment to have that reality check? I
think there is a lot of places, but I think a lot of this starts with the self, right? To some extent, at least to me. And that was my experience throughout the book as well. It's not necessarily something you have to accept first that you don't know, like, right? And to accept to not know, sometimes you need to engage with something which makes you very uncomfortable. For example, I went on like probably 4 or 5 years and I decided I want to sing. My goal was not to sing really. I wanted to improve my, communications and like speaking skills. But I went and like tried to do opera singing for, and to me that was like, I knew ahead of time, I don't know anything about this going into it, like, right? And sometimes engaging in these things, like traveling to a new place, so that sometimes help, like speaking a new language, trying something completely new where you actually know you don't have the answers, is sometimes a great place to start, because it exposes you, it gives you a taste of what it's like on the other side. Like, right, where, yeah, you don't know the answer, and pick something you really know you don't know the answer, not something where you're like, you're being playful with it. And this is where extremes come into play. Like, I'm not a fan of extremes in the negative notion, where it is like, go all the way to the extreme and be an extremist. No, but teasing the extremes, like teasing things where are to an edge where you're not comfortable with, is, I think, super valuable, because it shows you things which were outside of your radar. T.S. Eliot says something which I think is really, really interesting. He says, we are distracted from distraction by distraction, and that brings into light that, there is a context which always exists, which we're not aware of, but it always exists. And the fact that we're staying clear of it is what's happening, like, right? And that brings it to, like, that's why go, try something new, which you were uncomfortable with. It can be something, it can be writing a book, it can be, there's so many different dimensions within your means to do that.
That really resonates with me. Early on in my career on Wall Street, I was feeling a bit stuck, and I got passed over for a couple of promotions, and I was getting really frustrated. And I kind of ran out of tricks. And I went to a mentor and asked him, what should I do here? I'm really I'm not sure where to go next. And honestly, your advice was exactly what he gave me. He said, go do something outside the company, volunteer your time, learn a new skill set to help round yourself out. And in fact, I went and did fundraising for an independent film festival. And holy cow, I mean, just completely changed my perspective on things. And for me, the power of that was just gaining this whole new perspective that I could take and apply back to my job, but from a completely new lens. So I'm curious what the opera singing did for you in terms of that and how it changed your perspective.
Yeah, it's the same as like this lens, and like this new way of seeing things is super powerful. To me, opera singing, we really not understand fully what goes into, the classical arts, like from breathing, from a lot of different things which happen to your body and like to you as a person. But for me, the biggest thing in opera singing was the vulnerability. Like, you open your voice and you sing and you feel like naked, like literally. And you bring that as well to other contexts where you realize, you're usually uncomfortable to speak or be present in your own skin and sort of speak, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. And singing helped me kind of see that much better. It was all of these insecurities, all of these things which kind of I was burying deep down. And then suddenly I was like, loud voice screaming in front of a stranger. And like, imagine that in front of an audience, like, right? You get to do this, like, you literally feel exposed, but it's such a liberating feeling, this exposure. It's not a negative thing. And yeah, so that's kind of a lens which I've never imagined I would kind of get or understand any other way, to be honest. Engineering, there is no avenue for that to happen anyway.
Being vulnerable was liberating. I really appreciate that concept. And, another nugget, and I think we're talking around it here, when I did this exercise myself, going out to help the film festival, at the end of the day, it was sales. And that's what I was doing. I was selling investment products on Wall Street, but now I was selling ad sponsors to a film festival, which seems completely different. And what I learned through that experience and what I was able to take from the film festival back to Wall Street was, it's not about the product or service. It's about understanding the customer's needs and creating alignment with that, with the right product for them. And that was such an eye-opening experience for me. And when I brought that back to Wall Street, it really helped me take off. So I'm curious how the opera singing or any things you've done outside have impacted your career. Any specific stories there you might share?
And my career, absolutely. I think, if we see it back to the vulnerability in a sense and like going out of that, it gives you more confidence in yourself and like how you express yourself, how you communicate, how you present, right? And it automatically creates this trust and bond. Like, I think we started with COVID and everyone went remote, but no one was prepared to deal with remote. Like, realistically, even we've been using Zoom for ages, but it's one thing to conduct your whole business over Zoom versus in person. In person, there is
every single meeting, right?
Yeah, exactly. And in person, there's a lot of these things that happen which build the relationship, which you have to kind of trigger. And part of it is like the authenticity, the trust, like, right? Those are very challenging, I would say, to achieve remotely. And why? Because in a remote setting, everything is predetermined. You have half an hour, you're going to be talking about these things, and there is no opportunity for this kind of casual interaction, like the water cooler conversation. There is no this after meeting kind of banter, which happens where you actually build, your relationship with others. You're being authentic. You share things outside of what's the agenda, so to speak. And I think this kind of vulnerability comes into play significantly. It allows you to be automatically build this rapport and authenticity and be able to engage in these conversations without being in the room with the same person. And I think that helped me a lot. Like in the last 2 years, I've been purely operating remote with teams in Norway, Copenhagen, and Bangalore, like different sites, different cultures. And it's very hard to, build relationships. And everyone knows like building a relationship in person is very different than building relationships online. But it does definitely help me to, bring some of that vulnerability into the conversation and being very honest and like kind of authentic and not necessarily always sticking to just the topic, but being comfortable, like diverging, because at the end of the day, we're humans. And if we don't have that element, I think we lack a lot. So kind of that brings it, front center.
So getting this new level of vulnerability through opera singing actually helped you connect, finding ways to be more vulnerable and connecting through your business relationships, being more authentic, and in doing so, building deeper and probably faster relationships. So it oftentimes is a big part of getting business done, right? Is the speed at that you do things. And I find so many times people see vulnerability as a weakness. And I would argue, as I think you just did, which is, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that it's a strength. And in fact, it may feel painful in the short term, but can accelerate things in the longer term as the relationship builds. But all of this stemmed from you putting yourself into that uncomfortable space, growing, learning, and moving forward. What a great story. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, John. Thank you. I appreciate it. It's been definitely a journey, and it's glad to now be able to share it with the world as well. And I hope in this book, it kind of culminates that and people get to experience it themselves.
That's awesome. One other theme I want to talk about in the book before we move on a little bit is this idea of idea ownership you talk about. What's important about this and how does this play into our daily lives?
Yeah, I think this is a really, it sits on the fringe of every conversation in a way in the business world and in the back mind of people. And I feel it's like really fascinating, and because it stems of us letting go of certain notions. And I bring this concept specifically when we're talking about time, to be honest. And because idea ownership is like this kind of possession, like holding into something and fearing. It has a lot of different feelings around it. And at the same time, it's built into our structure of how we, evaluate, how we give promotions, all of these things, right? And, this came up through a conversation of one of my interviewees, Lucas Huang, which he was the co-founder of Beyond Medical. And he brought this perspective, really that center to him, because when he was trying to engage with different stakeholders and push new ideas, and he was trying to find the best solution, without thinking who owns it and who's gonna basically lead with it, or, with no filters, right? It allows them to really explore these notions, because at the end of the day, idea ownership limits you. It creates a filter, automatic filter, whether you are conscious of it or not. And it limits how the innovation happens. And I think that's very dangerous, because if we are limiting how we, share, how we can build on each other, it's such a limiting factor. And at the end of the day, we all lose, right? And I think there is a lesson here to be learned, is it's this very strong filter, which always almost goes unnoticed. And we have so many of those. I think I just shared idea ownership. It was one of the ones which was very interesting for me to bring front, but we have a lot of these things. We have these pre-notions of what things are, what things need to be, all built up from our identities, our stories, and we frame everything based on that. And that's, to some extent creates so much limitation on what we can create and do.
Idea ownership constrains innovation. I don't think I could agree with you more on that one. And I think what it is, you talked about identity. If we say, this is my idea, we attach it to our identity. And then if people don't like it or agree with it or say we could do this or that differently, Suddenly then it's a personal attack, right? Instead of solving a problem, creating more value for our clients, customers, what have you, it turns into me versus you and not liking me or my idea. What a really interesting bit of context there. One of your subtitle, right? In Pursuit of the Right Questions. Carlo, how do we determine what those questions are as we look for our reality checks in life?
Yeah, great question, and a very, very difficult one. That's why I said in pursuit, because there is a key aspect to when people read right question, they automatically what comes to mind is like, what is a right question when what is not? Like, right. And in my research and like exploration, there is no bad or good questions. But what characteristic I've kind of attached to right is this notion of understanding versus knowing. And the question automatically loses its power when it already goes into the realm of knowing. So, and that happens usually when you already have an answer or when you have only one answer. And the reason that happens is, the right questions are trying to explore something. They're trying to, if you don't have a window to say that there is not only one answer, and this is more of an understanding, not a knowing, because knowing is limiting. When you say, I know something, it's like you have already, that's it, you made a block. But when you say you understand, you keep the possibility that there might be multiple understanding. And the right questions are very good at surfacing that. And to me, what the wrong question is a question which already knows what the answer is, or a question which already assumes that there is only one answer. Automatically, you're kind of removing all the power from the question from the get-go. And it's like no longer have wheels to run on.
So limiting, and it really can constrain the possibility of outcomes and maybe finding a better one, right? What an interesting way to frame that. When you think about the book and the book journey, Carlo, and as you've gone through it, you've written, you've done all this research, how has the book changed you? And what do you think you've learned about yourself along the way?
Absolutely. I think it was a reality check in and by itself for me, going through the whole process. Like I named the book and I kind of went through the process. And towards the end, I tell it like flat out is like the experience by itself was a reality check in understanding myself, my limitations, how I saw the world to some extent, which changed, to be honest. Coming from engineering, you have this mindset of like control and manage and these constraints. And to some extent, early on, the book was very framed on that notion. And as I went through it and kept to learn more and more, this is where this knowing to understanding started to change and evolve, and understanding really how much, that we can be anything we want to be, one. And then really, it is so difficult to see things, prioritize them, but at the same time, it's so easy. Right, it's just a matter of letting go of so many things which we assume are us, creates these limitations, and we are much more expansive than that, for sure. And if there is any reality check, I think at the end of the day, for me, which was particularly revealing, is, there is no limit to what we can achieve, who we can be. And automatically that allows us to address anything. And suddenly it becomes easier to see what really is the key thing to address. When you know yourself so well, at the same time, you're open to more things, not only just what you know. That kind of, if you want, paradox creates this reality check. It is really a paradox to some extent because it has both elements simultaneously. It's not either or.
You've got to be open to a range of possibilities, right? Can't go into these circumstances personally, professionally with an answer in mind and knowing the answer to the question, right? Genuinely being curious, being authentic, being vulnerable, accepting that it might be wrong and that there's a better solution. I really appreciate that. And I love that your book, the title was a reality check for you. I hear this many times that authors say, my book was written for me as the first reader, right? This kind of thing. So given this journey you've been on, Carlo, what's been an unexpected positive for you from writing your book?
One is this clarity, which I gained. And I've kind of started to realize articulating certain things. Well, first off, I think the biggest difficulty in writing a book is actually articulating your thought, not having your thoughts. The thoughts are always there. Articulating them is a whole different challenge, right? And I think throughout the process, something which was not necessarily an expected outcome was this clarity you gain and bringing forth thoughts and in an accessible manner, which I think is usually very difficult. I feel we all have something to say, but saying it is so, so difficult. And that, I think, I did not expect that. I wasn't really aiming to get that at the end, and it just happened along the way. And I think that's fascinating. It's really the power of when you're engaging in this kind of process, how it shapes how you structure and deliver things.
How we get our story out there, how we make it compelling, and how we make it understandable, right? So there's clarity to it, and people know what the heck we're talking about. That's awesome. What would you say, Carlo? What is the key message that you want readers to take away from your book on Reality Check?
One of the key elements was this notion of understanding and knowing, and which really ties down that we really can achieve the impossible as long as we really kind of rehone on trying to ask what the right questions are. And that kind of tees down to that, right? My answer to how we can get better at questions or the right questions, one of it is having more of the reality check moments. And if anything, I would like people to live either with a reality check moment through reading out. They realize something resonates with them where they feel, this is what happened to me. I can build or see things differently now. And if that happens, mission accomplished.
If I can see things differently now, take a new stance, not be so set in my ways, and open my lens to maybe not necessarily a bigger or better, but different possibilities that can open up our minds and help us come to a better solution at the end of the day, I think is what I'm hearing. That's an awesome message. Carlo, now you've gone to Notre Dame, you've gone to Georgetown, you've written a book, you just never seem to stop the educational journey. You putting all this great content out there in the world. What's next for you, my friend?
So what's next? I'm building a little bit around the book. I started this Reality Check Institute. With my technology background, I'm not only doing a book, but I'm doing a platform as well, where people get to engage in a more interactive way in the exercises in the book. So I'm building around that notion. And that's the next step forward in creating a community of change makers that can actually try to address the right problems, try to see the world in different lenses, and a community where we can all collaborate and share to basically build a better world.
A community movement. You've got resources out there to find out and learn more and build their own journey and maybe join your community. Carlo, if people want to learn more about this content and you, where might they go?
Yes. So you can go to realitycheck.institute. So it's just like realitycheck.institute. This is my website. You will find all information about the book, the platform, the community, advisory, consulting services, anything you think of if you need help, a lot of free tools and, workbooks that are available as well for you to download and engage with.
That is awesome. More resources for the world to learn how to find their own reality check. I did want to share one great quote for the book that you got from Ellie Tuma. I enjoyed the stories in Reality Check. Carlo's authenticity and integrity shine through with each lesson and takeaway. Furthermore, the breadth of interviews and concepts inspired me to better understand myself and the world around me. Ellie Tuma, Director of Client Solutions at Energy Sciences and author of Hanin. How did it feel to get that quote from Ellie?
It sounds great to hear feedback on really touching people. I think at the end of the day, that's the best thing which could end up happening.
That is fantastic. Carlo's book, Reality Check in Pursuit of the Right Questions, will be available this spring wherever you buy books online, 2022. Carlo, great to see you. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much, John. It has been a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Go out and get Carlo's book as soon as you can, and definitely check out his website. I'm your host of the Creator Community, John Saunders. Keep moving forward.